Hello everybody, welcome to Fruitful Trees, and here I am on the floor with these hanging orange sherbet mangoes. And they're not exactly touching the floor yet, but as they get heavier, they will, or they might touch the floor. So today's episode, we're at Tropical Acres Farms, and we're going to talk to Alex about hanging fruit that are touching the floor. How can you keep them from touching the floor, and what happens when they do touch the floor? How do you rectify the situation to make sure they don't, and why it's important to do so? This is Alex at Tropical Acres Farms, which is a tremendous mango farm in West Palm Beach, Florida. They have over 300 different varieties of mangoes, and this is the place to go if you want to learn about mangoes. Alex has been studying this for a long time. So this was a great tip that I don't hear many people speaking about, but an important one. I'm going to take that advice and I'm going to save myself a lot of these mangoes so they don't go bad. So check it out now. Here's Alex at Tropical Acres Farms. All right, here's Alex from Tropical Acres Farms, and today we're going to learn something that's very important to those of you that are growing mangoes. Hi, Alex. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
All right, show us what you're going to talk about today.
So today I'm going to talk about how you can preserve some of the fruit that you have, which is developing on your mango tree, but unfortunately is low on the canopy and laying on the surface of the soil. So there's some reasons why you want to get that fruit off the ground, and is a really simple way to do it. So I'm going to show you what happens if you don't do this, and give you some incentive for going out and propping your fruit off the ground so that you'll have more mangoes during mango season than you otherwise would. So right behind me here is an Angie mango tree, okay, one of many that we have here in West Palm. And as you can see, some of these lower branches have fruit that is sitting on the ground at this point. So the branches aren't on the ground, but when they flowered, they make panicles that go out, more than a foot a lot of times. And then the fruit that develops off of those panicles is now sitting on the soil instead of suspended in the air. So two things happen when this occurs. One is that the fruit is very prone to getting sun scorch or sunburn as it sits on the ground and heats up, especially on days where we don't have a lot of cloudy weather. And you can see that's already happening with this Angie fruit here. And sometimes this happens later in maturity, and the fruit is okay. But when it happens at this stage, the fruit actually will decompose in that area where the sunburn occurs. So if we were to feel this, and I can feel it right now, this spot is soft and it's going to decay. So this fruit's not going to be any good. It's not going to be saleable, and a lot of it won't be edible. So actually, I'm just going to take this fruit off this tree and just toss it to the side here, okay? So we're not going to keep that mango, but that's what happens when you let it bake in the sun on the surface of the soil. Now, another thing that happens is sometimes the fruit won't get sunburned because it's a little bit shaded by the canopy or by another tree or whatever. But even though it's sitting on that dirt, okay, it's still going to mature and try to ripen. And what will happen is insects, like ants in particular, will burrow into the bottom of the fruit that's touching the dirt, and then the bottom will kind of decay and rot, and then you've got a fruit that you don't want to eat, that nobody wants to eat, and it's just a wasted mango. So to keep that from happening, we can do something very simple here. We can take a piece of bamboo. You can also use like wooden stakes that they sell at Home Depot if you want something a little sturdier. Some people will use plastic rods or things of that sort. The bottom line is all you're trying to do is get that fruit off the soil so that now the fruit won't get baked by the sun, okay, because it's not sitting on that hot dirt anymore. And you've got it up in the air so that it's not going to get stained by the dirt. It's not going to have ants trying to colonize it. And also, because it's off away from any vegetation that might otherwise be there, we're going to get less fungus on the fruit too. So when mangoes are sitting inside of weeds, okay, there's more humidity and moisture, And not only will they get more anthracnose fungus on the fruit, but they'll also get fungi like sooty blotch and fly speck that will show up on the fruit too. Now, these are more common in western communities of Palm Beach County or interior areas of the rest of the state, and that those kind of fungi will give the fruit kind of a dirty appearance. But they can even occur over here in the less humid area when the fruit is sitting amidst the grass and vegetation, which is going to happen when it's sitting on the ground like that. So by propping it off like this, we're going to get cleaner mangoes. So, which of course matters to a lot of people. So we're going to just take this and kind of lift it up and take our stake here and try to figure out where we got to place our stake to get the fruit where it's got plenty of clearance above the soil, and that any weeds that come up won't, interfere with it. So we're gonna we can either use just our own force, or we can take a hammer, like a little hammer like this, and just tap it in. So depends on what kind of resistance you're hitting. Sometimes you might hit roots or something like that, and it might be difficult for some people to press this down like that. So in that case, you would just gently tap it with a hammer like that. But anyway, we're gonna just take a piece of like cotton twine. You can use like nylon string if you want to. This stuff is cheap, and we can get it over at Home Depot or Lowe's or one of those places. And you don't need a lot of it. So like about this much is usually all you need to tie off this mango panicle. Okay, and then we just take it, kind of center it like this, and then we wrap it around like so a few times, and then we tie a double knot, just a simple knot. Okay, 2 knots is all it takes, and that's it. So now our mango is off the ground. It's fine, and most of the time it will hold up. Once in a while, if it's not tied off tightly enough or properly, it will slide down. So you may need to periodically take a look at your fruit that's staked off like this, just to make sure that the fruit has not sunk down towards the ground again. And in a lot of cases, you'll have multiple mangoes that are next to one another, which you can put on the same stake or same stick or whatever, and save yourself some sticks and twine. And it achieves exactly the same thing. You're just trying to get the fruit off the ground. But that's the process of staking fruit. We do it here at the farm, and I do it in my own backyard. So.
Great, I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So I see a whole bunch of other fruit over there that's not exactly on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
but it's
close, right? So,
like, would you stake that even if it's close, or are you only talking about fruit that's literally touching the ground?
if a fruit is close enough that we judge that fruit is going to be sitting on the ground within a few weeks or a month or something, as the fruit, gains size and density and weight, we'll stake it up, beforehand, and that way, because we know it's going to be sitting there if we leave it. If we feel like there's enough space between it and the ground that even after it develops some more, it's going to be okay, we don't bother to stake it, because it can be supported by the branch. It's not like a situation where the weight of that fruit is going to break something, okay? But in other cases, sometimes we have to prop up a limb due to the weight of the fruit.
Now, when you say if there's enough space, does enough space mean if there's any space, or does enough mean there's a certain amount? Like
enough that we figure, okay, as that fruit gets bigger, we can judge that it's probably going to drop at least several more inches towards the ground. So if it's like, let's say, just a few inches above the ground midway during fruit development, it's reasonable to expect that it's probably going to sink down to the soil surface. And sometimes they're just kind of scraping the dirt, but even then, that's not desirable either. So in that case, we'll definitely prop it up. If it's like a foot above the ground or so, and it's already like at least more than midway through fruit development, you usually don't have to stake a mango like that. So like this, for example, well, actually, this is kind of funny. This one is hanging on the branch of its neighbor. So you see this mango here?
Yeah.
And now sometimes I'll actually practice this too when I am going around staking up fruit. So we can take a mango like this, for example, and we drape it over a neighboring branch. Okay. And we just, saved ourselves a stick.
That's a good tip.
So, and the branch is absolutely strong enough to support this mango, okay? So that just saves us a stick and some string and some time. So that's another thing that you can practice within your own orchard. If you've got mangoes that are hanging on the ground and maybe you don't even have a stick available or whatever, sometimes you can just drape them over other branches for the time being or through the
What
fruit's
about
whole development.
putting a plate under there or something? Does that ever help?
A plate?
A plate under the mango that's on the ground, would that help at all
Well,
or
the
no?
reason you don't want it sitting on something is whatever it is sitting on is going to get baked in the sun. It's going to heat up, and then the fruit is going to heat up and it's going to
Okay.
get scorched. So part of the process of this is actually just getting it off of a surface so that there's air circulation around the mango, and that way it does not get scorched even when it gets super hot, which sometimes here the temperature can get up into the mid 90s here. The fruit will a lot of times bake if it's sitting on the ground because that dirt gets super hot. But even if it's sitting on, I had a piece of foam that had fallen out of a box or something, and it was in my backyard, and there was a mango that was sitting on this piece of foam that had just developed over top of it. Like this wasn't like intentional or whatever. But I kind of ignored it, and the mango ended up baking on that piece of foam. So like, you don't want to like have the fruit resting on any kind of surface while it's developing. You want it suspended in the air.
Great.
So
Now I had another question. So when you're shaping a tree, a lot of people with the high intensity density trees, there are some people out there on the internet that'll say, "Oh, you don't want a tree, you want a bush." But then everybody that ends up doing that ends up having a lot of mangoes on the floor.
right, and
So is it
that's
better when you're shaping a tree to have more like a stick and a lollipop on the top, or and to try to keep the low branches eventually away? Or what do
okay.
you think?
So some people will eventually kind of, they'll call it skirt the tree, where they will take away some of those lower branches. In my opinion, that's fruit production that you can take advantage of while the canopy is growing. So there's no point in sacrificing those lower limbs just for the sake of keeping fruit off the ground for the first couple of years. That's perfectly usable mango that you can just simply prop off the ground with a method like this, and you know, it works out. And maybe after the canopy has gotten sizable enough where you don't care so much about the fruit that you get from those lower limbs or whatever, you can go ahead and cut away those branches, so that way you don't have the issue of fruit that's hanging on the ground or getting in the way or whatever. But for the time being, you might as well take advantage of that little bit of canopy you've got and increase your harvestable yield. And this is a simple practice that we do. It is a little time consuming, so we don't always get to it in a timely manner, but it is something we do to ensure that we're able to get a little more mangoes available to our customers than we otherwise would if we just left them develop on the ground like that, and then that fruit just goes totally to waste. We can't use it. So
Sure. When somebody's pruning trees, when they're whatever age, are they going to get less mangoes or more mangoes on the top if they're pruning the top and the mangoes more, the bottom's more mature?
yeah, typically once trees get to a certain size, the tops of the canopies are often more productive than the bottoms, just because they're getting more sun exposure than the bottoms are. The bottom parts of the canopy is usually receiving more shade, and so the parts with the most sun exposure, the flowers, are getting visited by insects a little more, and actually the air is a little bit more circulating, so they get a little less disease sometimes at the tops. But sometimes when actually the tops of the canopies have been pruned more recently than the sides, actually the sides will fruit more than the top in a case like that, because the sides have more mature stems on them. So it just depends on the state of the growth and how mature those stems and leaves are when the bloom stimulus comes around in the winter here. And so, but a lot of older trees, it's not uncommon to see them a little more productive on the tops of the canopy or on the south sides of the canopy that receive more sunlight. So during the winter, the sun is disproportionately shining on the southern end of the canopy. So a lot of times the south side of a tree will have more fruit than the north side. That's very common.
All right. And so these mangoes here, this is an Angie tree. Is this an issue or a situation with all trees, or do some trees do this more than others?
Yeah, trees that have what we'll call a horizontal growth habit are definitely more likely to have fruit that's hanging on the ground versus trees that are more vertically oriented. So an example of a vertically orientated tree would be a lemon zest. So a lemon zest tree is probably, I mean, not to say that it can't happen, right? Depending on how it's been pruned and how it's growing, but trees that have that more vertical habit are less likely to have fruit that is hanging close proximity to the ground compared to an Angie, which is a more spreading growth habit. It's growing a little more horizontally than vertically, and it's going to start fruiting at a younger age. Whereas certain varieties are not as precocious, and the canopy will develop a little more size before they start fruiting. So yes, this is more likely to happen with mangoes like Pickering and Angie and Honeykiss and some of these other ones that are kind of naturally precocious and naturally spreading. So
would those be more like semi-dwarf ones?
yeah, it's smaller. They're usually smaller trees to begin with. So like those are all either small or dwarf trees in the case of Pickering. Dwarf Hawaiian's another one where we end up with a lot of fruit that is hanging close to the ground, and we have to stake quite a few of them up. So that's normal, but it's a small price to pay for getting fruit in 2 years or whatever after planting a small tree.
If people don't have the white strings, could they use the green, the stake up tomatoes? What do they use that? Elastics?
Yeah, you can use that too. It's really only coming in contact with, part of it's coming in contact with the panicle. Sometimes a little bit of that will get onto the fruit because the excess string will be hanging there. Sure. This is like a cotton type string, like a twine, but you can use something that's maybe a little more durable. This is going to break down, in the sun after a while, but it's usually good enough to last the duration of the season. So, and actually, I have reused the strings before on some of these. I just untie the knot, and then I'll have reusable string for the next year, so you don't have to keep buying new rolls of twine necessarily. But you can use the tiny like survey string, like the nylon stuff, or you can use what you're describing, like a little plastic tie or whatever.
Anything.
It just has to secure it well enough that it's not going to sink down later on. So when you tie this, make sure that the knot that you're tying is good and strong without breaking the fruit, of course, or without breaking the panicle. So.
Great. All right. Any other tree you want to show us this example? Or that's
we'll just come over here and
there's two on the ground.
Yeah, there's a few. That one's actually, those are still a little off the ground, but I probably should stake that. But we'll just do this gaylord here, because this gaylord, this is a tree that's got a decent amount of mangoes here, and that are kind of resting on the ground. So it's got a little bit of that horizontal growth habit, as you can see. And these lower branches are not very far. These first scaffold limbs are not very far off the ground. So again, we're going to just take this, get these out a little ways, and I am meeting some resistance here, so I'm going to hammer this in just a bit. All right.
Now, if somebody's growing a tree and this area is like cement, they could put a chair or something and lay it on there. Would that help, or not necessarily?
Well, they could put an object like underneath here. Yes, they could put an object underneath the branch to prop up this off the ground, but you wouldn't necessarily want it resting against the surface.
But leaning on something. Okay.
Yeah. So,
and even without cement, that's another choice you could have did here too, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty. So this is I imagine now, does it, other than the ants and stuff messing with the fruit, if it's on the floor, can critters get more into the tree and affect the tree more, or not necessarily?
What I do find is that they actually, ironically enough, not to say that animals won't attack the ones that are on the stakes, but I've noticed that they do seem to avoid the ones on the stakes for some reason, maybe because they think it's like a trap or something. But we're more likely to have animals eat fruit that are actually kind of laying on the ground than the ones that are tied on stakes. That's what I've observed. And like I said, maybe the animal thinks that it's getting tricked or getting trapped or something, or maybe they just smell the human presence on that stake. I don't know. But we have found that when they're staked up, they're a little less likely to be taken by raccoons and possums compared to when we just kind of leave them on the ground like that. So
cool. What variety is this?
This is called Gaylor. This is an West Indian flavored mango that is supposedly from Egypt, but nobody from Egypt has ever seen it there before. But that's what the literature suggested, that it was from Egypt. Anyway, it's a wonderful mango. It's one of the only mangoes that I compare in flavor to St. Maui. So St. Maui is a difficult mango to describe, and this mango has a somewhat similar flavor. It is a productive tree, kind of vigorous in terms of its growth rate, but it's been pretty resistant to disease as far as like bacterial spot and anthracnose are concerned over here. The issue we have had with this mango is it likes to split open on the tree, kind of like a Montpassan does here. So we've had years where we've lost a lot of fruit to splitting. I've had years that were not as bad. It has a light colored flesh, but very sweet, rich West Indian flavor with some spice and resin, but a little bit more than that going on too. So not an easy mango for me to describe, and not a very well-known mango either. It's been in Florida for a number of decades, but not too many people know about this thing. And hopefully more people will get to try it this year if the fruit don't split open too much. We'll see how it goes.
And what an amazing shape. It has a point at the end.
Yes, so it has like an oblong shape, and they can get some decent size to them too. They're not small mangoes, but I'm going to stake this guy up too.
Are there other mangoes that have that point at the end like that, or are these unique to that?
Yeah, it kind of is shaped a little bit like Totapuri, I guess, but it's not quite as large as Totapuri. As far as I know, it's not related either. So we'll stake.
And while you're staking that, I want everyone to note we're in West Palm Beach, Florida, and we're going right into sand. I mean, this is literally sand here. And if you're in South Florida, you might not be able to bang these sticks into the coral or something.
Yeah, and in this area, there used to be a house here, so sometimes we encounter some rock. But the rest of the place, usually we can just actually push the stakes all the way in. So this is kind of the exception in this area here of the property. And otherwise, like, I don't need to carry that hammer around. So.
Yeah, and people don't understand how much work this takes to have a mango farm like this. I mean, how many trees do you have here?
We have probably 1,000 at this point.
So 1,000 trees. So if every tree had just one mango on the ground,
yeah, we would need a lot of stakes.
Weeks of work.
Luckily, not every tree has that situation though. If we go around here, we'll find plenty of them that have nothing on the ground. It's usually only a certain minority of them that we have to do this with.
Yeah, there you go. That's how they look. Now, does that hurt or help when it's windy out, like that you're staking them? Does it?
I've never had a problem with the wind. What I have had a problem with is people tripping on them, or even me tripping on them. So that can be a little bit troublesome. You just have to remember that they're staked out there like that. Once in a while, I suppose I've had some where the weight of the fruit was so much that it actually caused the stake or the stick to blow over. And in cases like that, where you've got like a big cluster of mangoes, it might make more sense to use like a wooden stake, like one of those ones that they use for survey markers or whatever, instead of using a bamboo stick or something lighter than like that. But bamboo works pretty well for us, and it's cheap. So when you're doing a lot of these, it can add up quickly if you're using like thick wooden stakes. So this is sort of the cheapest method for doing this that I've found.
Sure. Nice. All right. Well, thank you for showing us that tip. Another great tip. I'm going to put the website below the video here. Tell us your website.
TropicalAcresFarms.com. Here we're in early May right now, first week of May. And we actually have started selling some fruit, so locally. And then we're taking some pre-orders for shipped fruit. But right now we do have some mangoes that we've been posting on our website nightly for local pickup. And it's going to get better as the weeks go by. But at least right now we're already selling some fruit to the public.
So when you say pre-orders, what does that mean?
Pre-orders are for people that want to have some boxes of mangoes shipped to them during the season. But maybe they're a little concerned about having to deal with the, kind of the rapid pace that the boxes sometimes sell, and so rather than concern themselves with that, they can pre-order like individual boxes, or they can get a subscription where every single week they get a box of mangoes shipped to them, and they don't have to concern themselves with going onto the website. When there's lots of people trying to buy boxes, because we usually post our boxes during fruit season. We'll post them twice a week. and sometimes they can sell down very quickly. So some people want to avoid that and just order them in advance. So we do offer that option this year. Our crop is substantial enough that we feel like we can do that. We haven't offered it in prior years so much, but we're experimenting a bit with it this year. Otherwise, right now, the only fruit that we have available for customers is local fruit for people that will come and pick it up. That fruit we post at night, people buy the fruit, and then they come the next day with their order and the fruit's ready to go. Once we're getting about 200 pounds of fruit in a few weeks, 200 pounds of fruit a day, I should say, we'll be able to open our fruit stand for daily hours. We're getting close.
Now we're at the beginning of May, and this year you already have fruit for sale for local pickup. Would this be considered an early year for mangoes?
No, I don't think so.
Normal?
I think it's a normal year. I mean, it's normal for us to have fruit in spring, so every year that I can go back and think about, we've had mangoes as early as March. So we did sell a little bit of fruit in March and April, but that's not unusual at all. I'm going to say our primary season is now starting. Here it is in May. The season's going to peak in mid-June. That's normal in South Florida for the season to peak at some point in mid-June or late June, early July, some years depending on when the bloom happens. So I'm going to say this is kind of a normal season in terms of the start of it. For most people, it's going to be later May or early June where their mango season is going to start, and it's going to run into August. What it will be unusual is that we're going to have some early season mangoes that have fruit in August because of the drought stress bloom, which we covered in another video. So that drought stress bloom has resulted in mangoes that are right now, for some of them, maybe pea size or marble size, and that fruit won't be ready for a number of months. So we're going to have carry mangoes in August, for example. Not necessarily in the abundance that we'll have them in May and June, but it's not normal to have early season mangoes during the month of August here in South Florida, and we're going to definitely have some for sure. I'm looking at an early gold tree behind you, Paul, that's got a significant, second crop on it. And early gold is a May-June mango here normally, and those mangoes I'm pretty confident won't be coming until towards the end of summer. So that's kind of neat.
So as of now, the beginning of May, how many varieties have you tasted this year already, do you think?
Decent number, several dozen. But that's in part because we had some trees that had a really, really early bloom. So we had very early Ugly Betties, for example. We had Ugly Betties in March. But of course, we also had Rosy Golds and Dwarf Hawaiians and Roses and Edwards, which are normal to have some spring mangoes on. We had a few other varieties that had some ultra early fruit, like Tess Pollock, for example. We had some early turpentines, and we had some other ones that I'm forgetting right now. But it probably is numbered in, I guess, a few dozen varieties so far. But that's not typical like across the state, but it's not unusual for us here. We had some early 015s, early Phoenix. Decent number of early Phoenix. That was unusual. So we have a few Phoenix trees, and they had pretty good crops, and those were pretty good, those early Phoenix fruits. So, but we're really looking forward to another, I'm going to say in another 3 or 4 weeks, where some of those main early season varieties, those standbys like Angie and Lemon Meringue and Carrie, are going to start to ripen. Because right now we have a lot of Edward, which is great, but it's only one variety in season at the moment. It will definitely, the amount of varieties we'll have is going to get better as we get deeper into this month or later into this month. And by June, everything will be cranking.
Sure. I know the later the season gets, the more mature the mangoes get, the better they get a bit of flavor.
Mm-hmm.
As of now, though, because I love at the end of the year when you said what your best favorite tasting mango was throughout the year. As of so far, the ones you've tasted, the dozen you've tasted, so what has been the one that impressed you the most so far?
I think the best I've had so far this season is Ugly Betty. It's either Ugly Betty or Phoenix. I'm trying to remember if there was one other that I had so far this season that really stood out. Those early Ugly Betties were outstanding. There was no there was no loss in flavor because they were occurring in March, like we were kind of expecting that to be the case, but it was pretty hot and dry. So that contributed to the bricks being higher in the fruit than it would otherwise possibly be. during the spring period, when sometimes the mangoes are experiencing a lot of cold nights when the fruit's starting to reach maturity. And when that happens, it kind of saps the bricks from them a little bit, but that didn't happen in this case because we had such a warm later half of the winter, and of course it was super dry too. So I think Ugly Betty probably was the best so far, but I'm leaving something out that probably didn't have too much fruit on it. I know I was having this conversation with somebody a few weeks ago about what the best mango was so far. It was either Ugly Betty or 015. It had a really outstanding 015 as well, and it had kind of a cotton candy flavor to it. So, but I'll say Ugly Betty.
All right. Well, thank you very much for showing us here. Everybody get to the site and order your mangoes, and it's going to be a great season. Thanks for being on the show.
Yep.
All right. All right, everybody, that was Alex at Tropical Acres Farms. I'm going to put his link to his website below the video. And remember, depending when you're watching this video, we're in the first week of May. Mangoes are available. He's selling mangoes on his website now for local pickup. He's taking pre-orders for mail orders, and soon his stand will open, and I'll be shipping out mangoes everywhere. So definitely make sure you pre-order some mangoes so you make sure he doesn't sell out and you get to taste the best of the best, because some of these mangoes, all of these mangoes are absolutely amazing. And the only mangoes I've ever tasted that I didn't like was store-bought mangoes from the typical grocery store that's picked way early and they ship them from who knows where. But all these mangoes that they have at Tropical Acres Farms, amazing. And it's because Alex knows what he's doing. And the link's below the video. So if you knew anything about this tip about hanging mangoes on the floor, if you've had experience with it, share your experience below to help others. And if this is something you're going to try to do and learn, now's the best time, because as you can see, a lot of mangoes hanging on these trees, and how low will they go? Well, that's up to you now that we learned that. Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Please subscribe and like and share this video if you did. Until then, everybody, have a great day and keep growing.